Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is the Topic 9 lesson. This one covers cyber war. This is issue 17 in your textbook. So as you look in the textbook and read, there's it's issue 17. The question asked is listed on the screen there for you. You know, is cyber warfare the future of war? And so I wanted to show you the Blackboard webpage because there are some resources here that will come in handy for you. First of all, you'll see the quiz and the issue analysis at the top like always. Please complete those by their deadlines. As you come down here, you're already watching the lesson. Thank you for that. My resources are right here for you. You'll see that like usual, you'll see my notes and I'll be referring to those as we go through the presentation. Also, there's a PowerPoint presentation which you can access. I'll be showing that to you and that'll help facilitate this discussion. And then lastly, there is a PDF here talking about the 0 Days documentary, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But these are three different things which you can take advantage of if you would like. This is a link you need to watch, you need to listen to this. This is an audio program from National Public Radio. It's like it says, it's how the U.S. hacked ISIS, and if you look at that in the browser, I'll show you what it looks like. When you open that link, it looks like this, and as you can see, there are some words down here talking about what you're hearing. And if you click on that blue button right there, you can listen to it. And this is from September 2019. It's very current. And what's remarkable about this, as you can see from this description right here, U.S. Cyber Command has almost always been very, very secretive, very private, very quiet about everything that they do, and that's starting to change. This interview, it just amazes me that they talked to NPR, and when you listen to this interview, you're hearing from many different people that work in Cyber Command and the things that they did to orchestrate and execute attacks on ISIS. I mean, it's phenomenal that the access that NPR got to Cyber Command is just, if you thought 2 or 3 years ago that would have happened, be like, you're crazy, they're never going to talk to you. If they'll even acknowledge it, that they're there. And so this is really a very cool program. So listen to that, and that's one reason that this thing is going to be as short as it is because I want you to listen to that and hear from people, fighting this fight on our behalf, out there in cyberspace. And so this is something I want you to listen to. There's another link right here called 0 Days documentary, and I'll allude to that in the lesson. If you click on that link, it opens up this Amazon Prime webpage. You have to have Amazon Prime in order to watch this, and even if you have Amazon Prime, it's not free. The rental of it is $3.99. If you have Amazon Prime, if you have that, if you are able to spend that money, I highly encourage you to watch it. That's just a phenomenal documentary. It's all about something called Stuxnet, and I'll tell you a little bit about Stuxnet once this lesson starts. But this was the first. This is kind of like one of the first known instances of cyber war, and it was us and Israel, the United States and Israel, and our what we did against Iran. And it's so complex, it's so intriguing the way that it was figured out, what was figured out and what's talked about within this documentary. It's like a spy novel or like a Jack Ryan kind of story or something. It's crazy, but it's true. So if you get a chance, if you can check that out, do. I'll give you like the highlights of what I want you to take away from that for sure in the lesson part here in just a minute. But those are some links from the Blackboard page here. My resources right here, and as you look at that PDF right there, that's 6 pages of notes that I took about that movie. If we were in the classroom setting, if we were still able to be meeting, what I'd do is I'd spend a day and I'd show you parts of this, It's just it's because it was the first time that it happened that we know of, and it was so good. It was so well executed what they and what they accomplished with it, and so using that as like a case study going forward. And so there's another copy of those notes right down there on that link right there. So if you want to watch that, I hope you will. You definitely will not be disappointed that you spent the time watching that, because it's very, very well made. So let me jump on into the lesson and we'll get started. Okay, so the question is asking, is cyber warfare the future of war? This is a heavy topic. Anytime you're talking about war, of course, the purpose of war is to kill people. It's a very heavy topic. It's not one that we in any way are taking lightly. This is a class about technology, how technology affects society and business, and with technology now being used to basically execute cyber war, that impacts society for sure. And so this is something that we're talking about. So the question is, are these types of attacks that you're going to be learning about, is this where war is going to go in the future, as opposed to traditional war where you have a tank and they're fighting against one another, or you have infantry, guys with rifles fighting against other guys with rifles, or tanks. That's what we're talking about in this issue. Is that online sort of confrontation going to be the replacement for that physical, real world clashing of humans and machines? And so that's where this issue is going. The learning outcomes for this are the following. There are three, and and we'll hit all of the outcomes. So let me show you those. Okay, so they are listed right here. Describe the elements that would make up cyber war, and I think that one's not very well written. I would instead say what you see right here: identify activities that should be considered acts of war or acts of cyber war. And that's something that as a society we need to be thinking about that, because as this becomes more and more prevalent, and as more and more nations use this sort of conflict, and we do, what constitutes an act of war? At what point does it push somebody over the edge to where we go to full-fledged, okay, now a war is being fought? So that's the first learning outcome. The next one: examine the pros and cons of why a country would want to do such a thing as wage cyber war. Speculate whether cyber war will replace conventional war. And so those are the three learning outcomes, and through the things that we'll talk about, through what you'll hear about in the audio program, if you choose to watch the Stuxnet, you'll certainly be exposed to all of these, all sorts of information which will help you answer those questions. Okay, as we look at the authors of the yes and the no side, you're looking at two very accomplished authors in the realm of cybersecurity, especially with regard to cyber war and international politics, and how cyber is used as part of policy, as part of offensive operations and defensive operations. The guy on the left is David Gewirtz. He is the author of the yes side. The guy on the right is Thomas Rid. He is the author of the no side. Gewirtz is a journalist, and he is a computer scientist. He is parts of all sorts of organizations, from ZDNet to part of CBS to you can read his bio. I have his bio down in the notes, and it's pretty exhaustive. If you reach out to the web pages that I've also linked out to about both of these authors, you can see that they have the credentials to be talking about cyber war to us, on this topic for sure. Thomas Rid is a professor. He's currently at Johns Hopkins University, in the area of strategic studies. He's written a number of books. One of the books he's written is about. It's called Cyber War Will Not Happen. I happen to have that book, and I got that after I started teaching this class. I bought that book just because this intrigued me so much. Like, okay, I want to read what this guy has to say. And so these are your authors. And again, there are links to biographical information about both of these people in the notes. If you would like to dig deeper into both of them, please feel free. So I feel comfortable telling you that I think both of these authors, have the credentials to be talking to us about these issues. Wanted to give you some information about myself because you know me from school, you know me from the classroom. I of course, I'm interested in this. I'm bringing this to you as something that we were talking about. So I wanted to tell you what my background is with this sort of stuff. I went through the Army ROTC program at WKU. I spent my freshman year. I was in Air Force ROTC. It wasn't for me. Switched over to Army ROTC my sophomore year. Finished that program, commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army National Guard, Kentucky's Army National Guard. I served with the tank unit for a few years in Bowling Green and Owensboro. I was a platoon leader. After being a platoon leader, I went up to our battalion headquarters where I worked in what's called the S2 shop, which is the intel shop. And so when these were the kind of tanks that we were using, these M1 tanks, I never was on active duty other than for training. I never got deployed. I've never been in combat. And so when we're talking about war, when we're talking about combat, I don't know what that's like. Fortunately, I've never had to go and do those things. By the time I was out was the time that September 11th happened and the world changed. So I was out by the time all of that occurred. People that have deployed, people that have, whether you just deployed and you were just away for a long time, or if you've deployed and you've gone to combat, people that have done those things have my utmost respect. That is so difficult. It has to be so terrifying. But I've not done those things myself, and so I'm not trying to come to you and act like I have. I have not. But I wanted to, share my so just in full disclosure, trying to tell you about myself as we talk about these topics. As we get into this, as you start to read the book, they're both pretty short passages. They're both well written. Some of what you start to read as you go through here reminded me of what I learned when I first started in ROTC. And I wanted to show you this guy right here. This is Dr. Jack Thacker, who was a history professor at WKU when I was a student, when I was your age, when I was in your shoes at WKU. And he was one of my military science professors. And as part of ROTC, you took a lot of different classes, but some of those were military history. This guy was a great teacher. He was one of my favorite teachers I've ever had. Just super knowledgeable in what he was talking about. He also just was very personable, and he just knew his business. He would go up to Annapolis from time to time and teach at the Naval Academy. He's kind of like like Jack Ryan from the Jack Ryan. Jack Ryan in the books he's an academic working at the Naval Academy, right? I mean, Jack Thacker this guy knew his business. He was great. And in his classes, one of the things that we learned about the principles of war from Karl von Clausewitz. And so as you start reading about Karl von Clausewitz, and especially with regard to the no side, when the author is, when Thomas Ritt is talking about how, certain conditions which must be met in order for something to be considered an act of war, he's referring back to the works of Clausewitz. And so I studied those things under Dr. Thacker at WKU, long ago. And so what I think is interesting is that the world has changed so much since Clausewitz. Clausewitz was a Prussian military theorist, hundreds of years ago. And so much of what he did is still so relevant. But if you could sit down and drink a beer with Karl von Clausewitz today, I think the things that we experience and the things that we run into would be, I think you'd think a little bit differently. And so I take issue with Thomas Rid, and the no side of this saying like, no, this is not an act of war, this is not an act of war. Well, the world has changed. We didn't have cars back then. We didn't have, we certainly didn't have computers. We didn't have networks, and we didn't have ways to access other people's things like their power grid remotely. Back when he was alive, and so all these different topics like military operations in urban terrains. We called it MOUT. I think there's probably some other name for it now. This stuff when I was in the Guard was like over 20. It was like 22 years ago, and so I think they even call it something different now than when I was in there. But I think that Clausewitz would probably classify things a little bit differently than he does now, and as a result of that, I sort of take issue with some of the stuff that Rid proposes as, this is not cyber war because it doesn't meet all these different criteria. Well, those are just personal opinions. All right, great. So this is that is introduced. I wanted to bring that to your attention, and I wanted to give you some examples of things that have been done which might be considered acts of cyber war. And so that's where we're going to spend the next few minutes. Okay, so the first example is just to be historical with this. Let's go to like the first known piece of cyber warfare software that we can talk about, and it will be Stuxnet. And if you watch that movie I was telling you about from Amazon Prime, you'll learn all about it in great detail. Hopefully you'll look at my notes. And again, there are 6 pages of notes that I took over that topic from the movie. Essentially what happens in that story is that Iran starts to build a nuclear weapons program, and so this is all true. And so they have centrifuges, they have nuclear facilities which basically are creating the uranium that is needed to make it can be weaponized, be made into a bomb, and it's very scary. The rest of the world is going like, oh man, I don't know if I want Iran to have a nuclear bomb, and Iran starts basically saying out loud, hey, when we get this thing built, we are going to nuke Israel. And the people in Israel, of course, are being like, okay, they're threatening our lives, we're going to take them out. And so the United States is allies with Israel. We don't want a full-scale war going in the Middle East. The amount of lives that would be lost, the amount of just damage and everything else that would happen because of that would be horrible. And so, as some sort of means to deal with that, an idea was put on the table saying like, hey, why don't we, instead of a physical attack, what if we use computers and we attack Iran with our computer power, and then by doing that we basically we slow down and stop their nuclear program. And that's what Stuxnet was about. And it wasn't called Stuxnet, it actually had a different name by the people that created it. And it was named Stuxnet by people that eventually discovered it. And the reason it was discovered was because of as they went through different versions of this malware, this malicious software that was used to get into the Natanz nuclear facility where this stuff was, where the weaponized uranium was being made. The Symantec, that's like McAfee, that the antivirus company, the people that discovered it and were trying to figure out what it was, that's the name that they attached to it, and that's the one that sort of stuck. And the rest of the world kept referring to it as Stuxnet. But the people that created it, basically the Cyber Command, the NSA, that's not what they called it. And so this this software, this malicious software that they made, was so intriguing because the nuclear facility itself was not actually connected to the internet, and so they had to figure out ways to infect other people that would then take it over what's called an air gap, and they had to get that infection over the air gap and into the nuclear facility, which they did. And as they went through various different versions, the Israelis just got more and more aggressive with that software, and eventually they made it so aggressive that it got picked up by the Symantec software. It spread so much. It wasn't just being localized in that one area, that it basically got detected. And after a very long time and much investigation, it was figured out, that there was some sort of malicious software there. But this software that they created, it was successful. It was destroying many centrifuges in this nuclear facility, which the Iranians were using trying to create a nuclear weapon. And it took them offline for about a year. But again, because it got so aggressive, as different versions were released, it eventually was detected, and then the Iranians were able to. They were fighting against, because they didn't know, they had no idea that they were even being attacked. And that's the other thing about that Stuxnet that's so incredible. It went so long before anybody even knew anything was there. So that's that first example for you, that Stuxnet malicious software that was used. As we move on into, if you look in the notes, let me jump over to the notes real quickly to show you something. Okay, so over on about the third page, the top of the third page of the notes, you'll see it starts talking about examples of cyber warfare and nation states that use cyber warfare. It starts with the Forbes article, it goes on to New York Times, then NPR, and more New York Times, and so on. So this is where several of these examples I'm going to be sharing with you are coming from. Okay, so let's look at a few of these. So from these articles, so in 2018, cyber activities by Russian-sponsored hackers directed at network infrastructure devices worldwide, such as routers, switches, firewalls, and network intrusion detection systems. And those are all things which make networks function. So if you have, that's what makes the internet basically work. So if you can infect those sorts of things, you're going to then be able to listen to messages as they are sent around the internet in those areas. You're able to direct attacks from those particular areas. You're able to potentially shut those things down so that other services no longer work. And it, again, like in this story, it's saying cyber activities by Russian-sponsored hackers. Much of this stuff is done by groups sponsored by nation states. So it's not necessarily the Russians themselves doing it, or the Americans themselves doing it, or the Israelis themselves doing it, but through funding, basically through covert funding, they're paying people to do those things for them. That's common. And there are lots of countries which are really good at this. Russia is one of the best. Russia's really good. We're really good. The Iranians are really good. The North Koreans are really good. I mean, there's lots of very good cyber warriors. And so the goal of all this was basically to compromise these devices in these internet devices, so that the Russians could then do man-in-the-middle attacks that would support, so they could basically, as somebody thinks they're using a web page or whatever, they're actually being tricked with these man-in-the-middle attacks. And those sorts of attacks could be used to support espionage, or to steal intellectual property, to maintain just a presence in that network, listening, so that they could just continue to learn more about whoever they're spying on, or to just basically lie there and wait until, let's say, a full-fledged attack happens and those countries go to war. Then boom, you hit them with everything that you've got, and you shut down their electrical grid, you shut down their water purification systems, you shut down their traffic control systems, you shut down their internet access, and you think about the amount of damage. I don't know if you guys can hear, it's raining like crazy here. But think about the amount of damage and potentially, damage to life and the consequences of death from that sort of stuff. If you're shutting down water purification, and all of a sudden you've got like a city like New York City where nobody has clean water, well, they're probably going to be okay for a little while. But if that drags out more than a little while, people are going to start to get sick, and then people are going to start to die from the sickness, and so on. I mean, so those are sorts of things that are alluded to and talked about in this this article. In August 2017, this is from a New York Times article. Saudi Arabian pipeline portions were destroyed, basically through infecting, again through malicious software, through controlling. There are these devices which basically are used to open and close pumps and control the flow of oil, and by messing that up and building up pressure, causing explosions. And that has a physical real world consequence where then people are starting to get, if they're close enough to the explosion, then you might even get blown up or killed or maimed or something like that. So that's another example. May 2017, there was a very well-known ransomware which was released, and we basically credit, the world credits North Korea with creating this malware. This ransomware, I believe we've talked about it in class, where it encrypts your hard drive or files, or it could be like an entire drive, or it could just be parts of things. But unless you pay a ransom, unless you pay money to somebody, they won't give you the decryption key to basically get your data back. And so this spread all over, literally all over the world, and it did a tremendous amount of damage to computers in the national healthcare system within the United Kingdom. So exactly why North Korea created this, if that was the intended purpose, or did it get out and then spread like crazy as an accident, we don't know. And that's one of the things that makes this so hard to talk about, is that a lot of the times when things like this happen, people don't take credit for it. Whereas if it's like a physical world attack where, like somebody blows up a building, they'll typically say, "Hey, yeah, we blew up that building." With cyber war, a lot of times nobody claims credit for it, and so as forensic, technicians try to figure it out, the people that write that sort of malicious software generally will not put telltale signs in there unless they usually don't. So that's another example for you. Okay, so let me give you just another couple examples, and we'll move on. I'm sure you've heard that Russia basically used social media to interfere with American elections, and there's all sorts of proof of that. I don't see how anybody cannot believe that. I gave you guys information earlier in the semester where there's basically examples that that Congress has released to the American people, where it's like 1,500 different examples of these ads, which have been primarily through Facebook, just basically to sow unrest within the American public, and as a result of that, like here's a story from, as you can see right here, where U.S. Cyber is basically at the midterm elections trying to say like, hey, let's try and be proactive about it this time and make sure that the Russians don't meddle this time in our midterm elections. This one was from the Times back in 2018. So these are just examples of cyber attacks, everything from and you've got we've got one other article I'm going to show you in just a second that's basically talking to recruits in the U.S. Army Cyber Program, and they go through I want to say Fort Gordon where they do their training, but again, doing things like learning how to shut down a power grid, shut down a water treatment plant, listen as on a network, get people through phishing emails. These are all sorts of things which are part of this means of basically fighting online. And so these are examples. Let's jump over to this ISIS story. Okay, and so I showed you the link on Blackboard for this NPR story where the NPR reporters basically interview and talk to our cyber warriors as they talk about stuff that they have done and are continuing to do against ISIS. It's amazing. I mean, there's their intelligence, their skill sets. It's just amazing. And so you know where that is. I hope you're going to watch it. This stuff happens out of Fort Meade, Maryland, and there's a picture right there of the National Security Agency right there. Cyber Command is stationed at the National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland. One reason this stuff is attractive to me is because I lived at Fort Meade, Maryland. When I left Bowling Green, I graduated from school. I was in the Guard. My wife and we met in ROTC at WKU. I was older than her when she I was a couple of years older than her when she finally graduated and got her commission. She was an active duty nurse, and her first duty position was up in Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. So we lived at Fort Meade, Maryland. As you look at this picture, about 2 blocks that way was our house. And when I'd walk out on my porch, and let's say we're going to grill hamburgers at night, I'd look up and see the back side of this building right here. I knew a lot of people that worked at this building because they were my neighbors. Just having that personal connection to NSA is this thing is appealing to me. What Cyber Command is basically a military command. And if you watch the Stuxnet stuff, you'll learn about basically some stuff about Cyber Command. Cyber Command didn't exist until just a few years ago. It didn't exist when we were up there, and it didn't need to. There wasn't, we didn't have all this stuff back then. And so once the NSA started to realize, like once the Stuxnet stuff started to occur, and they realized that they wanted, or they wanted it to occur, by law, the National Security Agency is not allowed to do stuff like that. This is not a offensive organization. The NSA is there to basically help with defense, and so to help. They're not going out there and attacking people, and so something had to be created to make that possible, and that's where Cyber Command came in. The director of the NSA and the director of Cyber Command are the same person, and so it's really interesting. It's basically 2 entities out of the same building, but because of legal things, that's why Cyber Command is there. And when Cyber Command needs something, what they do is they reach out to NSA to get helpers to come and help do stuff if they don't already have the expertise within Cyber Command. So this is some information about the organizations which do this. Hopefully you've learned something new. Hopefully you again, this is a very heavy topic when we're talking about conflict, and we're talking about the stakes that are being these huge stakes that are on the table here. This is you have to take this seriously, and so please mull this stuff over. I'm really interested in reading your thoughts in the issue analysis for this week. So I'll wrap up with that. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and have a good day.